So we're sitting in a room with Ronnie and Leonard and Harlan, myself and Elmer, and we're talking about experiments. And I said, so how many variables are there? And Ronnie said, well, you know, you've got trees, and the bottom half of the tree is different than the top half of the tree. Okay, I really hadn't thought about that, but I guess it makes sense, right? The bottom half of the tree is closer to the ground and the top half of the tree is closer to the sun. I said, well, when we get barrels, you know, how's that work? He said, oh, they're all just jumbled up from different parts and different trees. And okay, so there's that. He said, yeah, and then, you know, you've got trees that are on the south-facing slopes that are different than the trees that are on the north-facing slopes. I'm like, seriously? He said, oh yeah, you get a tree that's down at the bottom of the hill, that tree's going to grow a lot faster and have less growth rings per inch. I said, and then he says, you know, you can get trees that have got 15 growth rings per inch. I'm like, really? I said, so what's down at the bottom? He said, oh, that's 6 growth rings per inch. I said, you're telling me that makes a difference? Oh yeah, that will make a difference. I said, well, what do we use around here? He said, well, we use 9. Who knew? But all of the barrels we have 9 growth rings per inch. This stuff is really deep. So we get that variable. And then Leonard chimes up and says, well, if you put it in warehouse L, you get a very different whiskey than if you put it in my favorite, which is warehouse P or L or whatever. And then the recipe, whether it's wheat or rye bourbon, and then the entry proof. Do you put it in the barrel at 110? Put it in the barrel at 125 proof? That'll make a difference. So by the time we get done with all of this, I go away and run the math and discover that we actually would need 4 quadrillion barrels to test every conceivable variable that had come out in this meeting. It was so like, that is probably not a very practical idea. So we went back and sat down with Ronnie and Leonard and Harlan and said, all right, let's distill this down a bit into what are the really critical variables. At the end of it, we decide that we're going to go out and chop down 96 trees and make 192 barrels. So we only get 2 barrels out of a tree anyway. None of that wood goes to waste. But you can't use the outer rings because of the sap. And nobody wants sappy whiskey. I guess unless you're watching some really dismal movie on a Friday night where sappy whiskey might work. So that's no good. In the middle, you've got brittle. So those are not going to make good staves. So you can only really take the staves that are in the middle part of the tree to make the barrel with. And so you end up only getting 2. So we chop down these trees, we chop them in half, and we separate them. So we've got top halves and we've got bottom halves. Now we're joking at this time because the comment is, well, what if this bottom half of the tree makes significantly better whiskey? Are we going to have forests of trees that are just like dangling from cords with no bottoms to them because we've chopped off the bottom and not done anything, leaving the tops to grow? So anyway, we fly over to Missouri and we find these different trees. So we find trees that have got 15 growth rings per inch, 9 growth rings per inch, and 6. So now we've got tops and bottoms, and we've got these different growth rings. We then make them into barrels, but we season the staves differently. So some staves are seasoned for 6 months, and some are seasoned for 12 months. So we're getting quite a lot of variables here. And then we make the barrels. We shifted the char. So some have a number 3 char, some have a number 4 char. We typically use number 4 char, 55 seconds, so we undercharred some of the barrels. So this is growing now, this variable. And then we fill up the barrels, some with wheat, some with rye bourbon. So the numbers continue to multiply of combinations and permutations. We vary the entry proof. And then we put them in different warehouses, because Leonard has his favorite warehouse, and Ronnie had his favorite warehouse, and the only way we could stop the argument was say, all right, well, half the barrels in here and half the barrels in here. At the end of it, we have 192 barrels of totally different, unique variables. And then we let the whole thing age for 8 years. And by the way, this is one of the fascinating parts about the experimental program, which I really don't think is fully understood yet. But the life cycle of an experiment is 20 years minimum. Because on single oak, we aged it for 8 years. So we did all the preparation, and then we finally get the liquid, put it in a barrel, and we're 8 years into the program. We then pull out and we bottle up every barrel. At this point, there are 1,394 combinations and permutations. So you could take from barrel number 1, and you could take a bottle from barrel number 192, and you could compare. So by the time you worked your way through it. So we put up a website, and we said, this is all about consumer choice. You tell us. So at the end of 6 months or so, we shut that down, we rounded up all the reviews, and we said, tell you what we're going to do, we're going to take the top 5, and we're going to bring in the critical writer community, which we did, and they rated them, and the winner was number 80, which, lo and behold, unbelievably, was one single variable off of Buffalo Trace today. The seasoned staves were seasoned for 12 months, not 6 months. Absolutely astonishing, because Elmer had always said, the best whiskey we make at this site is the liquid I'm putting in Buffalo Trace.